of graphs here. I'm going to walk you through how to do a single bar graph, double bar graph, and then we'll also do a double line graph and a scatter plot. So to start us off with a bar graph, what we need to remember is that whatever's going to be on your x-axis needs to be in the very first column that you're going to be highlighting. And since it's a bar graph and since it's your x-axis, it can't be numbers. It has to be words or letters. There have to be letters in there to help distinguish it as the x-axis and not as just data. So you notice I put in the months of the year. You can put numbers, but you would want to also put like the unit that goes along with it. So again, that Excel knows that it's supposed to be an axis label and not a data point. So if I want to do a single bar graph, I'm going to highlight my month as well as my data. So the column B would be my y-axis data. And then I go to Insert, Chart, and they call it a column graph on Excel. Bar graph is horizontal. We want a column graph. And so I'm just going to click column. And then before I do anything else, I want to make sure that the graph actually makes sense. So I'm going to compare a couple of points, like January is 3.8. Okay, that bar makes sense. June is 10.1. That bar makes sense. So I know that my data is correct because sometimes if you make a slight change, Excel is not going to do the graph the way that you actually want it to be. Okay, so now that I have my graph, I can do a couple of things. First of all, there's only one set of data, so I don't need that series. So I'm going to go into underneath my elements and I'm going to turn off the legend because it's unnecessary. This is also where you can put in your axis titles. We need a primary horizontal and a primary vertical. So now I can go in there and I would be able to switch this to rainfall, and then I would want it in my unit, centimeters. And then I could do the same thing for my y or my x-axis. I could switch this to, oops, sometimes it's a little finicky getting in there. There we go. Switch that to month of the year. And then I would also switch my chart title, okay? So that is a single bar graph. And if I click on it, you can see that it highlights exactly what data is being shown on this bar graph. But I'm going to get rid of this one for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight, say I wanted to make a double bar graph. Well, if I just highlight my two sets of data and I go back column and I click on it, everything looks okay, and I can go ahead and insert my elements and everything, but I have series 1 and series 2. I can't just click on those and change that. So what I need to do first is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to insert a column or a row above, and I'm going to say that this is year 2021. So this is my rainfall data for year 2021, and this is my rainfall data for year 2022. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. And now that I have those two titles at the top of my data, when I create my graph, notice my legend has already filled in for me, year 2021, 2022. Again, I would go back in, put in my titles for my axes and fix those and make sure that those are accurate. Another thing that you can do on here is say you want more grid lines. You can add primary horizontal, secondary horizontal, and vertical, so that way you can have more grid lines on there. That's just something that you can do. It's not necessary. All right, let's switch over to a line graph. Notice I have the same thing here. I'm going to just show you a double line graph instead of a single line graph. But notice that I have to put those titles up there and that they're not just numbers. If you just put numbers, Excel isn't going to read it properly. It has to have letters in order for it to know that it is a information and not data to be graphed. So I'm going to highlight both of those. Insert chart. I'm going to pick line. Now I prefer the line that has the dots as well. Now what I see here is my x-axis is putting all the times onto my x-axis, which is great. However, it's really cramped. So I'm going to show you something that you can do here. I can just go ahead and delete some of those numbers on my x-axis to kind of spread it out a little bit. So I'm just leaving the bar, and I'm leaving the data, but by getting rid of the times, I'm actually spreading it out a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read, okay? So you'll notice, here we go. Now my graph is a little bit more, the x-axis is a little bit more spread out. Now this is a graph where I would probably go ahead and do the, let's see, we're going to click on that. There we go. I would go ahead and do those extra grid lines just because it makes it easier to see the times a little bit when you do that. Okay. Finally is a scatter plot. Now, again, with a scatter plot is you have a ton of data and you're trying to draw a comparison between two things and determine whether or not there is a trend. So in this case, I'm looking at the price of vehicles in thousands. Oops. Okay, meaning that if it says 159, meaning if it says 159, it's 159,000. And the mile per gallon for that vehicle. So I'm trying to decide, do you get better mileage with a more expensive car, or is it about the same? So I'm trying to see if there's a trend. So I'm going to gather all of that data. Again, insert, chart. I'm going to do XY scatter. Now, I don't want the lines connected. I know they give you those options. We don't want that. We just want the lines themselves. So there is my data. But what I'm going to want to do is see if there is a trend. Now, again, I would go ahead. I need to fix that title. Miles per gallon is not a good title. I don't need the legend because it's only one series of data, but I would want to put on those axis titles. And finally, I'm going to add a trend line, and I want a linear trend line. So in general, it looks like the trend is the more expensive the vehicle, the worse your gas mileage is going to be, which is probably not what you would expect. But that's how to do the 3 different types of graph. Hope that helps with you with any of the graphing that you need to do. All right.